Welcome to the Vehicle Specification webinar, co-sponsored by the National Rural Transit Assistance Program and the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, Multi-State Transit Technical Assistance Program, also known as MTAP. So we will begin again with some housekeeping slides. So the control panel is how you access the webinar. The GoToWebinar control panel can be opened and closed by clicking the orange arrow. Click the screen arrow to view the presentation's full screen mode. You can move this control panel anywhere on the screen to make your viewing presence a little bit easier. Under audio, there are several different options. You may use computer audio or use your where you use your computer's mic and speakers, or you may select phone audio for the phone number to access code and your audio pin. We recommend that you use the phone generally because the audio is a bit clearer. If you have trouble hearing a speaker, please let us know in the questions box. If you're on the phone and you experience some feedback when you're unmuted by us, either your computer speakers and microphone are on, and the interaction of the two is creating feedback. Essentially, we're all working from home, so if you have a noisy background, please self-mute as well. There are several different ways you can participate in the webinar. You can share your comments and questions by typing into the questions box, which is at the bottom of your control panel. We're requesting that questions be held until the end of the two presentations. We will have about 20 minutes at the end of this webinar to address questions. We will review the questions asked by attendees when you first registered and then open the floor up to everyone. Please type your questions into the questions box, and given the high number of participants, we may not be able to take audio questions, but if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, we will provide a question and answer document to participants within a week. So on your control panel, there is a section for handouts. There are 2 handouts today. The recording will be posted within a week at nationalrtap.org. And if you would like a webinar transcript, we would be happy to provide it to you. Please email info@nationalrtap.org. Thanks again for joining us. I would like to now introduce Robin Phillips, the Executive Director of National RTAP. She has more than 20 years of experience working with transit and FTA programs. Take it away, Robin.
I get to introduce our great speakers who have agreed to talk to us today about the program they have at FDOT and with Qatar. First is Carlton Allen. He's the TRIPS program manager and assigned to the Florida Department of Transportation Spring Hill Inspection and Research Facility in Tallahassee. He's worked for Qatar for 12 years, and he also interacts with the engineering and related crashworthiness testing protocol. And he is the one that's going to help you walk through the Altoona standards to make that report actually work for you. Erin Shepard has been with the Florida Department of Transportation for 27 years. We agreed that she probably started as a middle school student, internship in the summer. 11 of those years were served as a vehicle procurement manager. Oh my gosh, there's a special place in heaven for people that do that willingly. And most recently, Erin has taken on the role as grants program administrator in the Florida Public Transit Office. Then we have Robert Westbrook, also known as Bobby. He became the State Transit Operations Administrator at the Florida Department of Transportation in 2008, and he administers the operations section of the Public Transit Office, setting policy and provides guidance for both urban and rural public transportation systems. Mr. Westbrook and his staff manage projects related to safety oversight, substance abuse oversight, vehicle purchasing contracts, vehicle safety performance, and transit maintenance. Previously, he managed the maintenance training programs for both urban and rural systems. And additionally, Bobby has served on numerous American Public Transportation Association and Public Transportation Research Board committees studying issues related to transit vehicle performance, safety, and transit personnel retention strategies. And we have Richard Price, the person who manages the MTAP program at AASHTO, and he's the Associate Program Manager for Transit Policy and Technical Assistance to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials Multi-State Transit Technical Assistance Program. He is the person who manages the Public Transportation Council, and he has a background in planning, so he actually knows whereof he speaks. So, Richard, let's see, here we go. Oh, and I need to go, before I hand it off, I thought I was going to hand it to him. We're just going to go over the housekeeping slides. The introduction to the TRIPS program will be Bobby. Then we'll have Aaron. And finally, we'll end with a bang or a crash as Carlton Allen, the TRIPS manager, will show you what he's actually doing. And Richard and I are just going to do a brief intro, little infomercial about our programs. I'm on the National RTAP Vehicle Resources page. These are some of the resources that National RTAP has to support your program, and these are available to you on our website. We have a brand new buying a vehicle training, and that just helps you get your specifications together before you think about ordering a bus and think about what kind of specifications you need for your program. We have lots of resources, and they're available in paper, PDF, and we also have an LMS, a learning management system, with lots of trainings that are available to keep your drivers sharp and up to date on safety and alcohol and drug. Richard, there we go. Now we're talking. Could we get Richard's splash page? There we go. Thanks, Melly.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it, Robin, and I appreciate working with National RTAP on this vehicle specifications webinar. And I also just want to start by welcoming all 263 attendees to this fantastic webinar. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. I'm hoping we have a lot of state DOTs on the phone right now. Transit agencies, again, I think the benefits are going to be seen once I get done talking. Nellie, next slide. And for those who are unfamiliar, let me just introduce a little bit about who I am and what I do. I am, again, Richard Price with AASHTO, and I represent the Council on Public Transportation, as well as the Multi-State Transit Technical Assistance Program, a staff liaison for both. And the Council on Public Transportation, real quickly, is the policymaking committee on transit for AASHTO, and we represent 50 state DOTs, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And like I said, we are the policymaking body, legislatively, regulation. I'm having a hard one with that one. We do regulation, and again, we make policy on transit for AASHTO. And MTAP is the technical services program for AASHTO on transit. And I don't want to brag a little bit, but we're a membership group, and state DOTs pay a little extra in terms of their dues to MTAP so they can belong. And as it turns out, we're kind of popular. We're the second largest TSP at AASHTO, I think right behind like the operations group. But I'm on their tail, and I'm looking for them. I'm coming after them. My hope is to get 52 state DOTs to join. As you can see, MTAP has a chair, Dave Harris from New Mexico DOT, and a vice chair, Don Chartok from Washington State. And what we do real quickly is first, I guess in the pre-COVID years, we held 3 in-person meetings annually, a State DOT roundtable at CTA Expo. We had a summer meeting, the State Partnership for Public Transportation, as well as our winter meeting. Again, that was pre-COVID. I don't think we're going to meet the 3 meetings this year. We'll try to do something, as well as we hold online educational forums and exchanges for our members. I expect that 8 to 10 will, of course, being that everyone's on a lockdown, will increase, and we'll provide more of those. We do reports and communications. We work on regulatory and legislative matters regarding state transit programs, and as well as we work on transit research projects, which I'm pretty proud of, because most recently in FY20, we were able to secure at least $800,000 for 3 research projects related to transit, state DOT transit specifically. And for FY21, we secured $750,000 for 2 research projects, one of which is going to be a jointly funded TCRP and NCHRP project. So I'm very excited. And of course, I'm the staff liaison for both research projects. You can go to the next slide. Here are our partners. I put National RTAP in the middle because they're really kind of holding things together for us, and I enjoy a great relationship with Robin as well as National RTAP. We co-host a lot of these events, and I look forward to doing more. We also partner with CTAA and APTA, both on legislative matters and regulatory matters. We hold a great partnership with FTA, and as you heard, TRB, we work well with them as well. Our staff, my leader, my mentor, Shane Gill, is our program director for multimodal transportation. He also is a staff liaison for the Council on Public Transportation. And if you want to know more about us, here are our websites. I encourage you to go. If you don't know anything about us, visit these websites, check out the information under what's new, and let me know if you have any questions. Now, I get the pleasure of introducing one of my members from Florida DOT, Mr. Bobby Westbrook.
Thank you, Rich. Welcome on behalf of Florida DOT. We appreciate being invited to be a part of this webinar. Before I get started, I'd like to apologize for the background here. My wife and I are both working at home because of the pandemic, like most of you probably are. We have a nice office in our house. She gets the office, I get sent to the garage with a lawn chair. So doing the best I can with the situation that I've got. Giving you a little bit of history on the program, how we ended up exactly where we're at. If you go to the next slide, please. In the early 90s, Florida DOT was struggling to meet useful life standards with the vehicles that were being procured. Maintenance costs were extremely high. Agencies faced warranty reclamation issues constantly and struggled to get resolution on those. We also had a couple of major accidents here in Florida at that time that brought into question the safety and construction methods that are used on cutaway type vehicles. I was actually hired at that time and asked to come in and work towards trying to resolve those issues. Actually, Liz Stutz, who is our state transit manager, her and I were hired right around the same time. She was also brought in to hire a separate issue, which is kind of interesting because it's what she's been doing most of her career is related to mobility, and I know how everything shifted in that direction. Excuse me. Next slide, please. We used a multi-pronged approach to go after those issues when we were looking at it and saying, wow, you know, the problems are pretty huge. And when you break them down, it's a multitude of things that are creating the issues. One of the first things that we did was centralize our purchasing. Florida DOT is a decentralized state. And at that time, we were allocating funds, issuing funds directly to the agencies. They were procuring the vehicles themselves. And due to that, they ended up having to deal with most of the issues related to that. They wrote their own technical specifications, and most of them were not very knowledgeable of the specifications. That's not being disrespectful to them. That's not what they do day in and day out. They struggled and tried to do the best they could. And then the enforcement of the contracts, once they put them in place, there was a struggle for them on that as well. When we centralized the purchasing, we hired the University of South Florida, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, to administer those state contracts. We also set up our bus testing facility. It's where we inspect all the buses that have come in through our programs, but it's also where we do a lot of the research, new technologies, performance testing on the equipment that we're buying, et cetera, that type of thing. And as I said earlier, it was kind of a multi-pronged approach, because we also realized that part of the issue on not meeting the useful life and the condition of the vehicles, of course, a huge portion of it was related to the quality of the vehicles and the specifications that were used and what they required out of the manufacturers. But there was also a problem with the knowledge base of good preventative maintenance programs on behalf of the agency. So we knew that if we wanted to get that, see the best results out of trying to increase our useful life and trying to lower the maintenance costs, we also wanted to address it from that side of it. So we implemented 2 more programs, one through the University of South Florida. It's called the Transit Maintenance Analysis and Resource Center. They provide training to all the technicians on the heavy bus side, and they have a maintenance consortium that we work with on specification development for the state contracts for heavy bus. We replicated the same thing on the small bus side, and we're currently using the Lively Technical Center to set all of that up and work with us on making that happen. The training programs that they both put in place, because they're connected with our contracts, are able to keep current on the type of training that we need to be getting out there to the technicians. And they also developed programs, and I know a lot of people face the same issue, particularly with 5310 agencies that don't necessarily have maintenance departments. They were able to set up some training courses to work with them to make them understand the importance of trying to set one up, even if it's through a contracted source. And they develop templates and methods to go about doing that. The final program that we put in place is our crash worthiness program. I mentioned the accidents earlier that occurred back in 1990. We've had a few more since. The original one that occurred, the bus had rolled over, the entire body had come off, leaving all the passengers exposed wide open. And I imagine a lot of you on this call are probably very familiar with cutaways and probably totally understand that the construction methods vary from one manufacturer to the other. And the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards that do apply primarily apply to the chassis and not necessarily to the body. The body itself, the school bus FMVSS 220, I believe it was being applied. What we had seen in some of our investigations was the materials handled differently during dynamic situations versus a static load test. So we pushed to move our testing over to dynamic load testing. Those programs that I'm speaking of, they're very important. They were a key to a lot of the success that we've had in Florida in getting the best bang for our buck, so to say, out of our tax dollars and maximizing the use out of our vehicles. At the end of this presentation, there's a list of the websites of each one of those programs. I urge you to take a look at those. Really good information there. And feel free to contact the people that are working those programs too. You'll find them very, very helpful, very willing to work with you. Next slide, please. These are the core elements. Once we started putting the program in place and really getting it up and rolling, this is initially where we primarily focused, and we developed a standard operating procedure that contained all of these elements to make sure that we were addressing them, and we had some type of methodology to go about doing that. You can request a copy of that standard operating procedure through either Carlton or Aaron. They'd be glad to get it for you. Those two constantly update it. So whatever you get is probably the closest version to actually the way we're running the program now, excuse me. Working off of these core elements, initially in the outset years of the program, the first, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, somewhere along that range, we saw immediate improvements. We saw immediate improvements immediately right away within the first year or two, and then we just constantly saw things steadily improve. Our vehicle performance improved, of course. Our maintenance cost per mile went down, and our safety improved dramatically. So we did see a good return on our investment. And I do want to kind of emphasize that a little bit, because everything that we're sitting here talking about today costs money to put in place. And we were just fortunate enough that the state was willing to make that investment, and realizing that there would be a good return on that investment. So if you look at everything we're doing, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. You might say, wow, that could cost us $1 or $2, but trust me, and we can show you that the return on investment is definitely well worth it. You will definitely see it. Around this time, once we had gotten everything up and running like it should, we had our SOP, everything was functioning right.
Muted.
It was working the way that I had really hoped it would and envisioned it would. It was about the time I ended up getting promoted, and I ended up making 2 of the best decisions I think I've ever made in my entire career. And I ended up hiring these 2 here that are about to speak, Aaron Skeepers and Carlton Allen. Aaron Skeepers, originally the program was called the Florida Vehicle Procurement Program, if I recall correctly. She rebranded the program. That's when it picked up the name TRIPS, Transit Research Inspection Procurement Services. The website is trips.org. And yes, we do get a lot of hits wanting to know about vacations in Florida. But it's a good site. You get good information off of that. It lists all of our contracts. Aaron put that in place. Aaron had a huge focus on customer satisfaction. And it really impressed me a lot. And when I say customer satisfaction, she viewed it not just from the perspective of viewing the agencies as our customers, but also the citizens that we serve. She looked at ways to improve ride quality. She tasked Carlton and his group to constantly go after ways to make sure that we are getting a good service out there to everyone that's utilizing our agreements. Aaron also recently got promoted, and as you can tell, there's been quite a change at the transit office in Florida. We're still going through a reorg, so everything, the dust hasn't totally settled yet. Aaron has passed the torch off to Tony Brandon, who's now the manager of the TRIPS program, and the one will be working directly with Carlton as we move forward. Carlton, I can't say enough nice things about this gentleman. He shifted us to performance standards, which I think was one of the smartest moves we made with our technical specifications. We no longer list items in there by name or reference, and we know or approved equals. Everything's based on a performance standard. It took him a few years to go through all the various contracts we got and get it there. And developing a performance standards a little bit difficult. Writing the standards one thing, setting up a methodology to verify that the product or the component does meet that performance standards, a whole nother. And Carlton did a lot of work in that area and has set up a system that is well beyond what my expectations ever were. He implemented a testing and evaluation program at our Spring Hill facility that continues to advance our vehicles and get us better quality and better rides for our ride quality for our customers, comfort level, etc. The evaluation method that he put in place made sure that we were getting the best buy for the buck. Not necessarily the cheapest, but the best buy for the buck. And in the long run, was able to show that it was more cost effective to go that route. Awesome setup. Heard you to listen to what this gentleman has to say. He again took this program to a level that far exceeded my expectations. Erin, I'm going to mention her one more time. She also serves as our current emergency management coordinator. Erin wears several different hats and kind of gets mad at me sometimes every time I say, here's another one you need to put on. But we were asked to address the situation and with the pandemic and some of the actions that we've taken on our end. A lot of it related to the buses themselves, but some of the work that we've done directly with the agencies themselves. And then Carlton's going to carry you on through after Erin is done speaking and give you a whole lot more detail about the project and the program and exactly what it is that we do. A lot better job than I did. I was just giving you an intro and an overview. So Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you now to talk about the COVID-19 situation.
Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate that. So safety in time of pandemics. The transit office at DOT, we have an emergency management team. It's made up of DOT staff and Cutter staff. And while this team is only covering the COVID-19 pandemic, we also cover natural disasters such as hurricanes that are very popular in Florida, as well as wildfires. Excuse me. But in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, this dynamic team went into action through the uncharted territory that we're all familiar with and became a valuable resource to our transit agencies. The development, we developed a transit emergency listserv that was created for the sole purpose of to push information out and bring information into our transit agencies. Early on, when we started the listserv, we realized that it was probably a really good idea to develop a resource guide of best practices, so to speak, that we could document everything that's been given to us throughout the country. There's the document has tips and strategies and practices that transit agencies across the nation have implemented, and the whole goal was to reduce the risk of being infected or spreading the COVID virus. It's a living document. We've been updating it either weekly or bi-weekly And on the slide there, oh, that's on the slide, sorry. The slide has a link to the guide, and we definitely encourage you to go look at it and check it out. It's got a wealth of information in it. A couple of key components of the guide is a document that relates to the driver barrier or operator barrier. As you know, the transit agencies are trying to protect their drivers. We realize that some of the agencies are going in and putting in temporary barriers to limit the exposure to the operators, realizing that there may be some safety factors to consider when designing and installing these barriers. We thought it would be wise for them to perform a risk analysis just to make sure that, you know, knock out any potential hazards. So the risk assessment is conducted to consider the operating environment, the existing procedures and training within the agency, equipment and human factors. The driver barrier is kind of like a new area to us. It kind of in Florida. We're not too familiar with it, especially on the paratransit side. So this guidance was provided just to make sure that we're keeping our operators safe, but also not imposing any risk. The CDC also and some other sources have provided great information and resource to the transit agencies in regards to how to clean their facilities and keeping their buses clean and safe. So the guide also pinpoints that information. And one last thing I'd like to talk about on the resource guide is something that as we went through, as we've been going through the process, we realized that, you know, our transit workers are very important to us and their wellness is very important to us. So while I know that this webinar is focused on vehicle specifications, I do want to just point out and note and remember that our transit workers are very important. As this pandemic progressed, it's clear that those workers are essential as they provide the transportation services to our public. And so in this guide, there are some tips to make sure that we keep our transit operators and our workers well during this time. So I encourage you to go look at this document. It's dynamic, it's large, it's 60-something pages, but it has a wealth of information. If you have any questions, we will be glad to answer them. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Carlton, and he's going to take you through the rest of the webinar with our vehicle specifications. Carlton's on mute.
Can you hear me?
Can you?
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to go into everything that we do within the TRIPS program, but want to start out with that none of this would be possible without the support and vision from the Florida Department of Transportation. They started this whole thing, and they continue to push us to do these things, and we appreciate that support. We couldn't do it without it. So within this specification slide, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the performance standards that we have within our specifications and how we, you know, what they're there for. Like the air conditioning pull down test, we started that because there was inadequate systems being installed in these buses for the climate that we, you know, see in the Florida environment. So we instituted a performance standard that we test at the Spring Hill facility in real world situations instead of other standards that are done performed in a booth. We want to verify performance, you know, as it's going to be, you know, seen in, you know, in service. The crashworthiness I'll go through, you know, in further detail in later in the slides. Alternative fuel standards. We, you know, once CNG came online as a viable fuel and propane as well, we saw the need to institute, you know, a standard, you know, for the installation and use of that that type of fuel, because it's so much different than regular fossil fuels. So it incorporates, national standards with, NFPA 58 and 52, but it also incorporates, our own specific guideline installation of these systems that are not addressed by other standards. Brake performance, there are other standards out there, for large bus and then vehicles under 10,000 pounds, but, as we all know, most of our vehicles are over 10,000 pounds. So, we want to make sure we have a standard on to go by for a new vehicle, but we also see that through the life of the vehicle, through, the general maintenance practices that have to be performed on these vehicles there, on a time basis. Same as emergency brake performance standard, we all know they work when they're new, but we utilize this standard throughout the life of the vehicle to ensure, a safe operation. Acceleration performance, we want to make sure this vehicle, we wrote this to make sure the vehicle could perform. And it has to be done in a loaded capacity. We do these things, we have proper equipment to measure these, and record these, so we can verify that performance. The charging system performance standard has been an adventure. We run into issues, we had issues with aftermarket alternators. They say that they will perform, they'll put out more than enough amperage, and then we find out, in service that they won't. So we had to, write a standard and then acquire the testing equipment to verify that performance. But after getting alternators that perform, we found people, putting excessive amounts of additional electrical equipment in these buses that reduced the performance of the charging system. And what we found is that while the vehicle is in service, performance would be reduced due to available amperage, and voltage for the batteries. So we've come up with an amp draw performance standard to where that you had to list all of the components that were going to be installed in the bus, and then the manufacturer had to do this analysis to verify proper amount of amperage and voltage would be supplied during service of the bus. We also have an amp or a parasitic draw test, because a lot of these vehicles have issues when they sit over a couple of days that, they go back to crank it up and it would be, the batteries would be dead. Well, by having a minimum parasitic draw, then that ensures that the vehicle is going to start after it sits for 2 or 3 days or however. And electrical system requirements, SAE compliance. As we all know, electrical systems, the wiring component and everything cause a lot of problems with these vehicles. So we state that they have to meet these standards. We don't say what they use. We say that they have to meet these standards, and they have to provide us the documentation that they do meet the applicable SAE standards for these type vehicles and the systems that they're operating. Well, they supply that information, but we also verify the information that they're doing. Now, next slide, please. Specification development. We began writing these performance-based specifications around 2011 contract. And we began that process to address concerns when specific components were named in contract specifications and failed to perform in a safe, reliable manner. It was also done to address specific items not addressed by federal or other industry standards. Performance-based specification gave the manufacturers the ability to procure components and engineer construction methods based on the performance measures within the specifications without interrupting their normal processes. When you do specific specifications that name specific, items and whatnot, it may be unfamiliar to a manufacturer, and then that creates problems in quality in the installation and whatnot. So that's why another reason why we went to performance-based. Parts of that are, the chassis modifications. We don't say, we say that they can't cut chassis, but just because there's available wheelbases for all the different length buses out there as it is. But anything that they do to that chassis has to be approved by the OEM manufacturer, meaning Ford or Chevy or Freightliner. They all have these processes in place that these second stage manufacturers should adhere to, and we verify that they adhere to. I also want to note that specific or performance-based specifications are only as good as a process to verify the compliance. The FDOT continues to provide these ideas and resources to lead to our success with this. So Nellie's moving ahead of me. All right, the introduction to the crashworthiness program. Florida's been conducting cutaway crashworthiness testing for more than 15 years. Spring Hill is the FDOT facility located on Spring Hill Road in Tallahassee and used as the headquarters for the TRIPS program. Every vehicle ordered through TRIPS passes through Spring Hill, where it is given a detailed final inspection. Crashworthiness testing is also primarily conducted at Spring Hill using a variety of test apparatuses that has been designed and constructed by the crashworthiness and TRIPS programs. Next slide, please. Not only do we crash stuff, you know, one of the great things about having an engineering program, you know, under contract by DOT, it gives us the ability to use their resources to test other things as problems come about. And a couple of examples of that you can see in the pictures. We had some issues arise concerning bike racks on cutaway buses and large transit buses, and they're, you know, impeding available headlight, you know, range. So working with the FSU crash testing bunch, we set up a testing protocol to verify what that output was. And you can see in that picture, you know, where we built a box and set up all kind of things, and we measured the actual light obstruction with bikes there or without. Another thing, we've had an abundance. We had an abundance of rear end collisions, so we want to look into adding more lighting to the rear of the bus. So you can see where we were testing light output based on different size lights and their lumen output. And finally, on this, we had some issues with electrical components. You can see that picture in the bottom right there, where we had electrical board that would heat up, and that component manufacturer said it was one thing. So, you know, we wanted to verify, you know, through testing, you know, to see if in fact, you know, their account of it was correct. Next slide, please. Motivation. Cutaway buses are constructed, as Bobby said, you know, a two-stage process, and the accident that he was talking about, this picture shows, and it's not something that everybody wants to see. So that led to the introduction to crash testing. Next slide, please. This is an identical bus to the one that was in that previous picture. And keep in mind that during this, as you can see, it was just a shell of a bus. It was not loaded. So the impact was not near what it could have been had it been completely loaded. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a bus we had with one of our agencies, where we actually went to and evaluated the actual scene, where there was just a driver and a passenger on board. Luckily, both of them escaped that with just you know, minor scrapes and bruises. But to further our research and better the performance of our buses, we started, with FSU doing crash research or reconstruction research. And this is an accident that they're still currently working on reconstructing. But, in an effort to evaluate passenger injury and whatnot based on the types of accidents. Next slide, please. Some of the testing that's involved with this, as you can see, the FMVSS 220, which is the only, crash standard applicable to these type buses, as you can see, is just a static load to the top of the bus, which is relatively easy to pass, but does not create a strong bus as they determine. School bus does it differently. That is the applicable standard to a school bus, but there's other standards within school buses that enhance, their strength beyond this as well. Which is why we decided to move to the dynamic rollover test that started back in the first one we did, I think was in 2009, actual rollover. Next slide, please. An essential part of the crashworthiness design effective in all types of crashes is a strong occupant safety cage. So as you can see here, what we've come up with is the 220, is a good test if everything happens straight up and down, but in a dynamic situation, the sidewalls would be relatively weak. So, and that all comes with the wall to floor and roof to wall connections that will see, a lot of rotation in a dynamic rollover situation. And next slide, please. So the pre-qualification is something that we go through when if we put out an RFP, or if somebody wants to become part of a future RFP, we have this pre-qual standard that they must go through. And what we do, and they have to complete this before we can entertain an award to them, or a situation, purchasing that type of vehicle. And part of that, we do a drawing review, a frame evaluation, but then we request an entire bus cage that we will cut sections out of, and then do actual testing of a wall to floor section, a roof to wall section, and then a complete sidewall section. And there's minimum standards that they have to meet, in order to be approved to move forward. And then the next phase of the crashworthiness part is the actual Florida standard, the full rollover that we do on our tilt table. Next slide, please. Am I muted?
You're good.
Next slide. Okay, yeah, next slide, please. Will you play this video? This is a video of an actual floor to wall test that we're performing. And what we're doing is just measuring the amount of energy that this panel will absorb over a period of rotation. By doing this, we can we get a better understanding. We can eliminate weak connections, poor designs, materials, and things like that. We're not out to change what manufacturers are doing. We're only out to enhance what they're currently doing. So next slide, please. This is just a pictorial drawing of the actual rollover, and it just gives you an idea of where it's going to land. And that impact zone is, what we've seen, based on looking at real life situations, what does occur. So that height seems to work pretty well, with what we're seeing. Next slide, please. This test is of a bus that was pre-rollover standard. And as you can see with the, the emergency door flying out and the amount of deformation, that's not ideal. Next slide, please. This just shows what we call the survival space. And as you can see, it's about 6 inches from the wall at the floor, and then as it goes up, it just maintains. It goes in. So in a rollover situation, nothing can intrude into this space. Next slide, please. This is a bus that had a very strong front section, but a weak rear wall, and it did not meet the rollover standard. The only difference between these two buses here is the strength of the rear wall. Next slide, please. The cage of this bus performed well. However, it had an actual seat detached from the wall, which is something that can't happen, as part of to meet our standard. Go ahead and play these videos. As you can see, this bus went through pre-qual testing and made improvements to their cage design based on pre-qual. This bus did not. And you can see, just based on pre-qual testing changes, the difference in performance. So we partnered with the Kate Engineering out of Indianapolis, Indiana, who's part of the EMI Corporation that does seat belts and seats for school buses. The intentions of this test is to further evaluate passenger injury based on seat belt design, 2-point versus 3-point, and then unbelted. So we did a dolly rollover with these instrumented dummies in there to gain information off of that. And then we also did a rollover in the same seat configuration off of our tilt table in order to compare the differences in passenger injury. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That's a good visual of the difference between the types of seat belts and no seat belt use at all. You see how much movement there is in a dynamic situation. Next slide. Okay, I'm gonna talk about Altoona reports and trying to get the most out of it. It is required when you're using federal funds to have this test documentation, so we might as well get something out of it. It was centered around determining useful life standards for transit buses. They recently changed to a pass-fail test, which is calculated on the amount of downtime over the test period. Any bus with less than 125 hours of downtime will receive a passing score. However, there's additional information contained within that report that can assist transit agencies project maintenance and operational cost over the life of the bus. Some projected operational fuel costs can be calculated based on the fuel economy test that is performed in simulated transit drive cycles. They use different style routes to calculate that fuel mileage, which you can use in turn to know what it costs you fuel-wise over a period of time. Maintenance costs can be projected based on the results of the maintainability and accessibility portion of the test, which can give maintenance managers an estimate of labor hours to perform PM inspections and services. On-track results provide insight on potential failures that could lead to unscheduled maintenance. Knowing what potential failures could be allow you the ability to perform predictive maintenance to prevent in-service failures. There's a lot of good information there to utilize out of the Altoona test, other than just saying you have it. Next slide, please. The vehicle inspection process, to me, is the most important aspect of obtaining a very safe and reliable vehicle that's going to last beyond its useful life. When we enter into an agreement with a dealer and a manufacturer, our first step is to do a pilot inspection where we observe the entire build of a bus and from inception to finish. And then what we do is we work with that manufacturer throughout that whole build process to determine exactly what we're looking for in that bus with routing, harness routing, installation of all these components and whatnot to ensure that these buses, can operate in a safe manner throughout its life. After that, then every bus purchased off of our contracts comes through the Spring Hill facility for a detailed multi-point top to bottom vehicle inspection. And then as we're doing that, when we see issues arise, which we do, we're in constant communication back with the manufacturer in real time to try and alleviate any problems that we're seeing here, that they can take care of that while it's at the manufacturing facility instead of us continuing to get buses with the same problems. Once it leaves our facility, then it goes to the dealer, where the dealer is doing another, inspection, not only to repair the defects that we find, but, just to ensure that there's no other issues before the agency gets it. And once the agency receives it, they're doing an inspection as well to verify that the dealer took care of the issues that we noted and to note any other issues that they may have found. Again, all this information goes into our database where we can track And that way we can, alleviate any issues, before they get out of hand. Next slide, please. Mechanical issue, we're there for technical support, for transit agencies. We actually, with the staff that we have, very technical and can work out mechanical issues, defects, assist with warranty claims and things of that nature to help the agencies, keep their buses on the road. Maintenance management, we actually contract Cutter with the PRPMT program where they do maintenance reviews and also provide maintenance technical assistance to the agencies for the maintenance of these vehicles to ensure that everything's done properly. It's a great resource for the agencies and us as well, because they're out there seeing these things all the time. They bring information back to us. We get to make changes to our specifications to address these issues that are happening. We conduct quarterly meetings with manufacturers and dealers to address all these items as well, which is another thing that, we can keep everything moving instead of things getting behind. Next slide, please. This is a link to the websites that Bob referenced a while ago. They're great resources for everybody. We utilize them every day. Like I said, with the engineering that the FSU group does, the training that T-Mart and Lively provide is invaluable to everybody. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Wow, that was great, Carlton. I mean, the thing is that you guys have such an in-depth program, and people don't have to recreate it. They can just take advantage of the work that you're doing. So
like I say, Bob came in the early 90s, as he said, and you're seeing his vision play out with the support of the state that, behind him. He gives us everything he has.
Unmuted.
This is his vision, and I can't thank him enough. And,
So we do have several questions. We wanted to address some of these questions that you sent in when you registered. Carlton, what are the recommendations for standard vehicle specifications? Each region may require various options due to their climate. So what should be the safety standard for safety, maintenance, and et cetera?
So when it comes to the standard vehicle specifications, when it comes to the chassis, it's limited. I mean, because we're dealing with Ford and we're dealing with Chevy or Freightliner, so their options are limited. You just want to make sure that you're getting a chassis that can handle the conditions in which it's going to be operated in. As far as the second stage process of it, I recommend, detailing what it is you need it to do, and then having it, but you have to have the ability to understand the response to what you're asking for. And again, the ability to verify that compliance. I feel like our safety program written into, our specifications is what anybody should be using. We'd really like for the FTA to latch on to these and mandate a federal standard. It'd make everybody's life easier. When it comes to our safety standards, I'm not saying they have to have ours, but if they started requiring more stringent safety standards, it would, help every state in America, get better buses, when it comes to that. But then, you can write a great specification, but if you don't have a way of monitoring compliance and then ensuring that the maintenance is being performed on them, it's really not going to help.
I believe the next three questions are related to safety in the time of the pandemic. So Aaron, if you're able to chime in and speak about what the recommended modifications are and protective shields, and whether or not there are already available retrofitted protective shields for drivers.
All right. Like I mentioned before, there are for the transit style vehicles, there are some driver barriers that have already been manufactured. On the paratransit side, we do know of a manufacturer that has he has a design, but that's one of the reasons why we talked about the risk assessment, because we want to make sure that you know, we don't want to close off the driver completely. There's issues that go along with that as far as airflow into the entire bus. So I think if you look at the document that we provided in our resource guide, you'll find lots of information in there that, you know, will point you in the right direction. But we really do encourage you to do the risk assessment, because while we want to protect our drivers, we also don't want to hinder any other safety issue. So please take a look at that resource guide.
Thank you, Erin. Some more questions, and then we'll get to the questions that are being asked right now. Specifically, so are there any kinds of recommendations for volunteer program vehicles? And then what kind of safety devices make seniors and volunteer drivers feel safe?
I'm wondering if Bobby could do the volunteer program. Is he muted?
I think they're referring to the 5310 type vehicles where they're using the volunteer drivers. Is that correct?
Yeah, 15
so.
passenger or less.
Yeah. And when they say safer, are they referring to safer during the pandemic type of situation, or safer in general?
I would go with just safer in general, things to look at with those vehicles.
So Mr. Alan Gilbertson also asked, referring this topic, how many different manufacturers do you test?
So we currently have four different manufacturers on our cutaway contract. Now, as far as overall, we have a medium duty contract that has 3 separate manufacturers. So we try and work with as many manufacturers as, you know, because we do multiple awards on our contracts, but currently 4 on our paratransit cutaway style contract.
And then Carlton, Bobby, or Erin, what roles do electric and fuel cell drivetrains play in the near future? Light vehicle deployment, and then essentially this kind of goes into what will vehicles be able to run on propane, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of alternative fuels that you guys see in the near future?
Cutter did our study for us on that and did a comparison between the fuels. Now, when it comes to alternative fuels, with the exception of propane, usually the benefit that you receive related to alternative fuels is reduced emissions. There very rarely is a huge return on investment. There's usually actually the opposite. There's a larger investment up front. The only one where we actually saw somewhat of a return on investment as far as a alternative fuel vehicle was the hybrids that use regenerative braking, and we saw a huge improvement in brake life. But the purpose of alternative fuels is generally to provide lower emissions in the geographical area that they're operating in. We don't really have any preference one over the other, and we still encourage you. I'm not speaking negatively about any alternative fuel at all. It's just that it's best to be kind of understand that up front when you go to make a decision about transitioning your fleet over to this type of fuel or that type of fuel, or even looking at going into the possibility of all electric. I would ask everyone that's considering doing that, look at that resource guide that the University of South Florida put together, because they did a really good job at trying to show real world comparisons about, hey, this is what the reality of it is, this is what you're going to expect to see. And a lot of times the success of an alternative fuel at a particular property depends on if they know what they're facing before they go into it. They usually, it usually works out better. If there's unknowns, then that particular alternative fuel can get a bad rap simply because of that. The only other thing I want to touch on, and Carlton might want to add to this, is the alternative fuels on the small bus side, the cutaway. That's been somewhat of a struggle. The only success that we've seen is with the propane. Everything else that we have tried has been pretty much a failure. Carlton is looking extremely hard at all electric, but a lot of that's all brand new technologies. And brand new technologies, I guess most other states are probably the same way we are. We're going to pilot it first. We're not going to just jump and go that direction. And you know, environmentally it sounds great, and it sounds like it might be a solution to one of the problems out there. Not knowing what the long-term effect is with running that technology, we don't want to get right in there until we know that particular technology is proven a little bit more.
That's a great answer. A follow-up for you, Carlton, is have there been any crash testing on propane vehicles?
No, we have not done any, we have not performed any crash testing. Now we verify, you know, we specify that the tanks have to, you know, meet there, because there is standards for those. So we just verify that, you know, that they adhere to those standards within our, you know, guidance within the specifications. We know that there's been propane-powered vehicles involved in accidents, and, you know, so far have not had any issues with that.
Now, the safety factor related to those, and Carlton and I have discussed this several times.
And like to piggyback on what Bob was talking about, advantages, disadvantages of alternative fuel, small buses. The propane we have seen good success with, and vehicles lasting beyond their useful life, you know, running propane. With CNG, that technology, you know, is still a struggle. There's engine issues with it, and you know, maintenance costs have seemed to go up when utilizing, you know, a CNG propulsion, you know, fuel versus fossil fuel.
Okay, and then regarding the question about the 5310 funding for Dodge Caravans for ADA transit, there's also been a question about if there's a way to add the Toyota Chaseless vehicles. And then are there any plans to introduce a low floor Chaseless in this particular program, Bobby or Carlton?
I can answer the question. As far as Toyota goes, you know, none of the minivan suppliers, or like Braun, have tried to introduce a Toyota, and it's all due to Buy America content. And we can't, without it meeting America, we can't entertain it utilizing the federal funds.
And on low floor designs, I believe that was part of the question too. Everything that we have tried on low floor, and we want a low floor design on the small bus side just as bad as everybody else does. But typically, the low floor designs are
Muted.
cutaway chassis that's already a
Unmuted.
process, and now you're adding a third stage process where they go in and cut and modify the chassis itself, which was the one sacred component of the cutaway bus that before we could somewhat depend upon. Now they're modifying that. Every one that we put into service to date, the types of failures due to, and I'm hoping if there's vendors on, I'm hoping I'm not offending them, but the poor engineering that went into that, it resulted in designs that we knew in the long term were going to be extremely costly to maintain and operate. But on the positive side, we are still working with every one of the manufacturers, trying to encourage them, hey, we need to go that direction. And Carlton, you might have something to share. I don't know what the latest and greatest is, if we got somebody that's closer to getting us where we need to be.
I think there's going to be some a product to look at in the future that we're looking at. That is, we had a lot of issues on our low floor stuff, as Bobby was talking about, with air suspension. You know, because it's not only is the bus a two-stage process. Now you're adding in additional changes to the chassis and stuff. So the ride leveling or air suspension stuff, we had a lot of issues with. We're looking into a product that will be a low floor design without any suspension changes, which could help a lot. But there's other issues, with low floor, two-stage buses as well, and that's dependent. But it all depends on where they're being operated. We have some here in Tallahassee that don't operate very well, just because they have big speed bumps around here, and you're tearing the whole underside of the bus out of it, and we can't control that. So, but yes, we're continuing to look and push and have discussions with companies to get us where we need to be when it comes to those designs.
There are actually several questions about manufacturers, but this one's for Aaron. Kevin Tavender asked, on the driver barriers, what are some things that an organization should look at? Aaron, you're muted. I'm unmuting you.
Yeah, I think Aaron's muted. Some of the, I'll go ahead, and talk about a couple things.
Sure.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. A couple of things that they need to look at, part of their risk assessment, is you don't want anything. Anytime you make changes to the inside of a bus, for passenger, part of that risk analysis, you want to make sure there's nothing that you put into place that's going to cause injury. But you also don't want to reduce the performance of the vehicle itself, airflow, things, such as that. That's some of the guidance that we put out was, we don't want to restrict airflow. We don't want to cause any kind of passenger injury based on the changes that we made within the bus.
Aaron, you're unmuted now. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to direct it to Bobby or Carlton. Bobby probably has something to add.
And Carlton kind of touched what I was hoping to get covered there. Doing the risk assessments is the number one thing. Part of our concern too was because we do so much work related to the accidents of vehicles and how materials behave, if there's a latching mechanism, hinge mechanism that goes along with that barrier, we need to know that during impact, it doesn't end up getting jammed, and EMS has access to that driver to be able to extract them during that emergency situation. We strongly urge that. And then, of course, what Carlton pointed out too. We definitely don't want to impede airflow for a system that was designed to not have that barrier there. It can be done though.
I hope that helped. Moving right along, we did have several questions about the, how the TRIPS testing differs from the Altoona testing. And one that I'd like to specifically read out is what's being done for cutaways part of the national standard similar to Altoona? Do these vehicles get certified as passing the cutaway crash test?
So, go ahead, Bob, I'm sorry.
That's okay. The Altoona test is more of a durability test. It tells you what's going to happen to that vehicle through the life of the vehicle, what you can expect as far as maintainability, your wear components, etc. What we do on the crashworthiness side is totally the opposite. We're looking at structural integrity of the vehicle and deformation during impact. So it's kind of two different subjects and people get confused over which one does what. And we rely heavily on the Altoona test reports, but the Altoona doesn't really touch on the parts that we wanted to know about. So we implemented the crashworthiness thing here on our end. But again, our hopes is that eventually goes federal. That's what we've been pushing for years, as Carlton mentioned earlier. It not only make it easier for the state of Florida, but make it easier for everybody else.
Yeah, so our crashworthiness is just a Florida standard only. There's, their certification is applicable to the contracts that, FDOT TRIPS puts out.
So that sounds great. You guys are ahead of the curve. So one question from Catherine Patterson is, WSDOT has received a fair amount of pushback from vendors or potential vendors on all the requirements included in our solicitation. Does FDOT see this at all when they solicit RFPs? If so, how have you ensured competitiveness in your procurements?
So when we went through the 2017 cutaway contract, we started out, we had 6 dealers, with 5 manufacturers as part of that, which I think is pretty standard, for most solicitations across the state. And considering we do multiple awards, with a negotiated, contract, it's pretty advantageous for all of them. So we get good participation.
Moving right along, we also have another vendor question. Does TRIPS bypass the dealers to communicate directly with the manufacturers about defects during an initial multi-point inspection, or is the dealer either the middleman or somehow part of that conversation?
So the dealer is always a part of the equation, because that's who, our agreements are with the dealer and manufacturer. But however, if you ask any of the dealers, they want us dealing, with the manufacturers as much as possible, because it makes their life easier. Because when they want a bus that has no problems when they get it, so they can expedite delivery, to the customer. So, but we work hand in hand. The dealer always knows, our communications with manufacturers and subcomponent, suppliers as well. We communicate with everybody and encourage all of them to communicate with us with any questions that they have.
Oh, sorry, from Pedro Rodriguez, we also have, do you have a list of the best cutaway bus manufacturers in ranking good, better, or best?
Well, part of our RFP process, is the scoring. We don't particularly rank manufacturers, number 1, 2, or 3. That whole industry ebbs and flows with, with their quality, which is one of the most important aspects for us is that. So, like I say, you could have one that you could call number 1 today. By tomorrow, they may be number 10. You know, it's hard to do that. So, it's part of our whole process. You know, if you're able to be on our contracts, if you're a part of our contracts, then it means you're a viable manufacturer and a viable dealer to provide products to the agencies of Florida.
Okay, so we also have another question dealing specifically with the Ford E350 and AC. Have you seen issues with the Ford E350 and AC issues, mainly wiring harness issues? This is from Rose Burrows.
We haven't. Now, you know, there's some known issues, and that's one of the great things about, you know, all the programs that the state's put into place is, you know, we have the ability to pass information around. You know, there's a known issue with Fords and their OEM side, you know, with their blower resistor. But again, you know, through all of our processes, we're able to pass that information around and kind of head those kind of issues off. Now, our AC installation is different than a lot of other states because, you know, ours is a standalone second stage system where most of these other, you know, low bid contract, you know, will do a tie-in system where you're basically piggybacking off of the OEM piece, you know, with a second stage, which causes issues for us, you know, and we don't allow because, you know, we don't want anything tapping into the OEM side. You know, we want to be able to separate it so that it can maintain its warranty without being affected.
So we have a couple of wheelchair securement questions that I'd like to pose. From John Cleveland, we have, why are the wheelchair securement areas always placed in the rear of a paratransit vehicle? And following up with that, rear placement of wheelchair securement areas make securement of the wheelchair problematic. What are your thoughts?
I would agree with what he said. Placing the chairs in the back of I don't know how our industry ended up there. And we do everything we can to encourage that not be done. Now, with that said, a lot of times the location of the lift itself is usually what drove the agency to make that decision on when they picked their seating plan. And I don't know exactly what the best way to break away from seeing everybody order in that configuration, but I totally agree. I think it's just crazy that we put them all the way at the back for a place to ride in a bus. I know I didn't answer the question, but other than to agree.
Well, that's how you can do sometimes.
It's a design thing that creates that because if you try and put the entry door, you know, at the rear, you know, in the lift up front, it's very difficult, you know, for the operation of that vehicle like that. So, you know, I think if we can find a viable low floor or a ramp equipped cutaway vehicle, then you're off.
I'd go away. That problem would go away.
Okay, and then Carlton, does the Cutter program or the FDOT TRIPS program actually perform maintenance on agency vehicles after they are delivered, accepted, and placed into service? And if so, do agencies bring these vehicles to Cutter or FDOT TRIPS, or is there a mobile service program available?
So I missed the first part of that question. It was kind of breaking up, but I think you're asking about how these vehicles are delivered to agencies.
So actually, I think they're asking if TRIPS performs maintenance on the agency vehicles after procurement. So after they're delivered, accepted, and placed into service. So once the buses are running, do you do any maintenance?
Yeah, that's more in my area. Trips strictly does the procurement side, and they assist the agencies on technical assistance as far as warranty reclamation. But as far as the actual repair of the vehicles, no, the agencies are still responsible for that. We did implement maintenance training programs that I've mentioned earlier in our presentation that really went a long way in getting the agencies where they're needing to be to understand what needs to be done to properly maintain. And the program is structured to address, regardless of the size of the agency, even if it's a small, very small mom and pop type agency, it certainly does not have a maintenance staff on purpose. On property, we still got a training mechanism in place to encourage them to establish their contracts through local repair facilities. Now, with that said, we've also looked at trying to implement state contracts. We talked to Penske, we talked to different groups like that about establishing different locations around the state to where we know that we could lock in a specific flat rate, and we know that we could monitor the quality of the repair, and we also know that the PMs would fall exactly in line with what needs to be done out there. We haven't gotten those types of contracts in place, but we are heading that direction. We also did some discussions, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, our friends in Illinois set up regionalized maintenance, and they used some of their 5307s that were more knowledgeable of high PMI programs working. I was really impressed with what they did up there too. So we did address the problem by getting the training out there, but could we do better? Yes. We could if we could establish those contracts. Moving it in-house and having someone like Cutter doing it, wow, that would be extremely expensive. It's more cost efficient to either look at what Dave Spacek did in Illinois or establish the contracts with the private sector and let them deal with it. Just our opinion.
Well, so we're just over an hour and a half. And so the remaining questions will be answered in a handout that will be delivered to all the attendees when the recording is prepared. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying and for these great questions. Robin?
Thank you, everyone. I hope that everyone uses this specification and we can help push the standard and start making it de facto. And the more you work with Florida and the more you combine your buying with others, the more chance we have of making better vehicles or encouraging them. Thank you so much, Florida. Thank you, Cutter and Florida DOT.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.